Baby, baby.
Hello, listeners. Your boy NotoriousSA, aka Steve Anderson, aka Mr. Worldwide from last season. You know, I said I was going to try to put an episode out earlier this year, and I didn't. Had some professional stuff going on, had some other stuff going on, but you know, when you do find a topic that is really worth discussing and you do find the time and energy to actually get this sort of thing going, it can be really productive. And I'm particularly proud of today's episode because not only is it my first in-person interview as a podcaster, but I believe Kim Cavill, the subject of today's discussion, is, a really interesting person. She's a school board member. She's a mom. She's part of the local community. We've interacted in multiple instances as someone who goes to school board meetings, and she's been to forums that are hosted by organizations that I'm a part of. It's important to have conversations with people in your community about what's happening in your community, particularly when the school board, particularly in schools. There's been a lot of talk in recent days about the upcoming school board election 1 month from today, which is as of recording is March 4th. So on April 4th, we have consolidated elections in the state of Illinois, likely in your local area, school board, library board, lots of off-year, smaller races that do have great impact on your life and the people around you and the places you go. But often the voting levels in these races is very low. It can be, on a good day, 25, 26, 30%, or it could be as low as 10 to 12. This is the kind of hyper-local thing that, in my mind, people get mad over national politics, and yet they put so much energy in a thing they have so little control over, and many of them just ignore or don't even realize that there is a whole world around them of local board members of institutions that people go to, schools and libraries and townships and your local city councils and towns and villages and all these other places. The people who control most parts of your, civic life, they're up for election this year. And odds are most of you probably don't even know unless you're in the know. You wouldn't even know that people already went on the ballot, got signatures, had to go through the whole signature ballot process, which I will discuss with Kim in a moment. But obviously the time has passed for people to get on the ballot at this point, but these local races are incredibly important because many of these positions can often be unpaid. They can often be subject to all sorts of harassment from people who either are deliberately or unintentionally being misled by those who have a political agenda. And, it's sad when people feel like they don't feel safe trying to express their voice in public or feel like if this isn't worth the effort. But, today's conversation gave me a lot of hope for the future. And it gave me a lot of hope that some of the people that we have in places of authority, they know what they're talking about. They know what they're doing. They can handle themselves, and they're educated, and they're, competent adults, which is sad to say a low baseline, but often something that we have to hope to get out of candidates. And frankly, in these local races, I'm always curious to see what challengers have to say. And frankly, I was not impressed with many of them, but I was impressed with Kim. So without further ado, and obviously after a long time waiting, I now proudly launch season 4 with my interview with Kim Cavill. Thanks so much for listening. Follow on all the socials and enjoy. Hello, listeners. It's your boy NotoriousSA, aka Steve Anderson, aka Mr. Season 4. Welcome back to the show. I appreciate you waiting. I know I said I would put an episode out earlier this year, but I haven't, so I apologize. But today I have a special guest I want to introduce. Because a month from today is the local elections, in which most people may not even know that people are up for office, I wanted to talk to someone whom I recently was at a forum with, someone I find interesting and I think can be a good explainer of local politics. So, Kim, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
My name's Kim Cavill, and I'm running for re-election to the District 211 School Board. And so District 211 is one of the largest districts in the state of Illinois, and it's in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. I've served on the board since April of 2019, which is the first time I'd been elected to any sort of public office, the first time I'd run, and then I'm currently running for re-election.
Excellent, thank you. So what I wanted to start off with was doing research for the show. I listened to a podcast you were featured on called Life is the Future, if you remember.
Oh, yes.
7/15/2019. There was a quote that host said I thought was appropriate. Mm-hmm. So he said, I like that you don't hold anything back and you do it in an appropriate manner and you give the details that we all need. Mm-hmm. And I feel like when I've seen you on the board and talking, I've been to multiple board meetings obviously since you've been on, and I feel like that's reflective of your style, right? Mm-hmm. Both your podcast and when you're on the board talking to people and in the forums, you give all the appropriate details, but you're not combative. And I saw recently you posted that, disagreeing with decency is a big post that you had both the first time and now. Mm-hmm. It's a great consistent message and I'm a big fan of it. Yeah. So for the listeners out there, could you briefly explain what does a school board member do? How do you get on the school board? And, what has been your experience since 2019 when you were first on?
Sure. And so I want to preface this question with the qualifiers that I normally have to present when I'm speaking about school board business.
Of course.
And it's important, and this is a great point for most people to be aware of, that school board members, this is state specific. Education in this country is very much localized. And so, the role of a school board member and the specific laws and regulations they have to follow are going to vary from state to state. So I'm going to speak to my experience here in Illinois.
That works.
And so here in Illinois, individual school board members don't have individual power of any kind. We speak as a collective body, largely through votes and policy. And that means when I'm speaking about school board business, I can really only represent myself. I cannot accurately represent the board, and I cannot accurately represent any other members of that board. And that's just due to the way that the board is designed to function. So I just want to be really clear about who I'm speaking for and why. And that goes to what the role is.
Of course.
Right?
Of course.
And so in District 211, we have 7 members, and they're split into 2 groups in terms of when they're elected. Terms are 4 years. So we have 4 members up, including myself, for this election coming up in April. And those 4 seats are up every 4 years. The other 3 seats are up in the 2-year interim between, so they're staggered. So, there's a regular opportunity for changeover for the Board of Education here in our district every 2 years.
Right, and you're not part of a slate, right? Is it you running?
No, I am running my independent campaign.
Excellent. And for some listeners who don't know, people can run together as a slate, which some people have done previously in this district, not to great success in some places, but it is something that you can do. And then, I don't know this might just be a little inside baseball. To get on the ballot to the school board, what's the number of signatures?
So you need 50 here. You need 50. But because of the way that politics tends to work in this state, it is advisable to turn in much more than the bare minimum.
Right.
Right? Because you can challenge petition signatures. And, if you actually look at the signature sheets, they can be in and of themselves very confusing to people. If you've ever signed for somebody to be on the ballot, you have to print your name, you have to sign your name, and people always mix up what you have to do. And there are lots of technicalities that you can use to get people's signatures thrown off the ballot.
For sure.
So, it's always good to give yourself some extra room. The first time I ran in 2019, I turned in just over 150 signatures. This time I turned in, I believe, just over 250 signatures.
Nice. Yeah. Is the max 250, 300? Do you know?
I don't know of a max. If there is one, I'm not aware of it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I've mentioned this on my podcast before. I've been involved in these many challenges, and so it is a very technical and can feel like very petty process. And I won't say who, but I know some board members seem to be fans of this process more than others. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. So the best way to circumvent that is to turn in 4 times as many as you need.
Right. There's always going to be a process. People will come, and that's part of the process. Because when I did it, the person who ran very clearly had a very shady way of going about it. And people do that, right? They round table, they put in fake names. You don't want someone on the ballot who's not. No. It's a pain in the ass process, but I'm glad you're able to go through it. Yeah. So I guess what I want to ask next is, since you've been on the board, it's been, when you got elected in 2019, or as I call it, the before time.
Right.
When things were a little bit different. How has it been since, so you were elected in 2019, right? And then a year in, COVID hits and the whole world changes.
Yeah.
What's it like for you on the school board?
It was it's been a wild ride. I think is more so than I expected. When I was campaigning in 2019 and really thinking about why I wanted to run for the school board and what I thought I could bring to the table and what I wanted to achieve when I was there, those things I've managed to do. So I really wanted to focus on the variety of careers that are available in each of our pathways. District 211 has career pathways and they can include like business internships and business specific courses. And there was, there's a pathway that's really focused on like healthcare, and both my sisters are nurses. I have a brother-in-law who's a nurse.
My mom's a nurse.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
It's a great job. And I worked for a long time as a disability care assistant, which is not a nurse, but it's a related sort of care field, and there's a certain level of health and medical knowledge that needs to be a part of being a successful disability care assistant. And so when I was looking at that pathway, the pathway was great, but my point was there are more careers beyond just nurse. There are physician's assistants. I would like to look in each of our career pathway and just make sure that they're staying relevant with the actual jobs that are available in those pathways, after high school.
Right.
And when those presentations have been made on the pathways, I'm glad to have been able to bring discussion to that, et cetera. But at the same time, I didn't have the expectation of dealing with the issues that took up the majority of our time in those 2 years, because yes, the world changed. And so, we've done a lot. Like, I was part of hiring a new superintendent straight off the bat. That's a big process. I think it's important for people to know. I was certainly concerned as a mom of 2 kids who are still young, busy parent. Like, do I actually have the time to do a good job at this? I don't half-ass anything. Like, I either do it right or I don't do it. And I want to make sure, do I have the time? And so beyond the school board meetings, you're responsible for reading a lot of paperwork and documentation.
Right.
And then when it came to the hiring process of the superintendent, I think that was at least 12 extra meetings all in the evening, and those are hours long. So it's a time commitment. But I was part of that process, super important process, happy to make the commitment. And then we went right from there into November 2019 when we had to take a vote on the locker room policy.
Oh, yes.
Right? And so that was a circus to a certain degree. We're having meetings in Palatine High School to accommodate 500 people.
I was there.
Yes. You know exactly what I was talking about.
Very
exciting. It was a lot. And then we go straight from there to COVID. Right. And it was interesting in COVID because I had 2 kids, of course, who are home. I'm also a District 15 employee, and I work as a program assistant in the special ed preschool program. That's not a job you can do digitally. Right. And so I was doing my best to do all the professional development that they gave us to focus on at that time. And then I was redeployed to teach in a self-contained virtual room for middle schoolers, because that's my certification.
Right.
And so I was teaching virtually for kids whose parents weren't comfortable sending them back to school.
Right.
My kids were sometimes home, sometimes not. And then I'm at the school board, and everybody's screaming at each other from all sides, and there's just not a solution out there to make everybody happy.
True.
And so it was wild, and since then, it's just felt like we've been hop, skipping, and jumping from one quote-unquote controversy to another. And I'm not going to lie, it's been stressful. It's a privilege to serve, obviously. It's also been stressful.
For sure. And for many of the listeners who may not know, District 211, since basically 2015, has been in national news in one way or another in regards to lawsuits revolving people wanting to use the locker room or bathroom that corresponds with the gender that they identify with, right? And it deals with, lawsuits from different parents, and then there was the presidential administration's change from one that was favorable to trans rights to one that was less favorable to trans rights, and then local control came in. So it's been, you can look it up, and I'll put some sources in the description later to talk about it, but there's been a lot going on. Which, on that topic, what I want to get to next is probably the biggest issue that we've been talking about with these forums, and this is the first article I mentioned. Anything that me and Kim are talking about here, I'm going to post in the description of the episode so people can read it. The thing that's been causing the most controversy, and Kim, I sent this to you, it was this, from Education Week, the new standards for sexual education that have been posted that Illinois adopted. And I'll just say off the bat, when I graduated high school in 2008, from my reading this, I'm like 2 things back, so I feel like my education is just almost barbaric compared to what's out there now in terms of evaluation. So, and since you're the expert on this, tell me, what's the difference between like the old standards and the 2011 one and the new standards? Is there a significant difference in terms of understanding or more nuances or anything like that?
I would say that there's more space for nuance. That's really up to a district about, because there's a misnomer. The state standards adopted the overall targets or subject areas of the national sex education standards, not those standards as printed themselves, which is important for people to understand. Now, those standards go into quite a lot of detail, which is fine, but that's not what the state requires, right? The state has a much broader view, but there are certainly updates to the standards as they previously existed, and it's been interesting. I think in Illinois, in particular, the issue was you have a patchwork of laws that all kind of talk around the issue. You had sex education standards, which would probably be most accurately described previous to the update as abstinence-based.
Correct.
That's not abstinence only, that's abstinence-based, right? And then, unfortunately, those standards are, first of all, most young people today would argue not modernized, 100%. Not applicable, which traditionally has been what most people know about sex ed. Not applicable or not relevant. Like that's
very true.
That's most of our experience, no matter when you had it, if you had it.
Literally.
Right. So the proud tradition continues. But the issue in Illinois is that we have like Aaron's Law, we have Faith's Law, we have all these other laws that speak to different aspects of what you could certainly argue is sex education or the violence prevention work. So Aaron's Law, I think, is what most people are more familiar with. And that's like abuse prevention education that's age appropriate, delivered from pre-K all the way through 12, required education in Illinois. There's been, HIV education and prevention has been separately mandated. So you had all this patchwork, right? And then it's confusing for people. It's certainly confusing for districts. And it exacerbates differences between what different schools are teaching. You also have the fact that in Illinois, because of state leadership, when you look at the laws of consent that were also recently updated, which are some of the most progressive in the country, about specifically defining what is and is not consent. And then you talk about like age of access to various forms of contraception, et cetera. There was a big mismatch between the old standards that we had and what our laws regarding access to certain things around sex was. So I think that push was about trying to bring all of those things into closer alignment. That's my understanding of the push. And so the main updates that have caused the controversy here in District 211, the 2 specific updates, were making an effort to make sex education more LGBTQ friendly, and that is to define sexual orientation and to define gender identity, concepts related to those things.
For sure. Or as some of the conservatives that I've been dealing with recently say, grooming.
And can I just say, like, if Fox News wants to know what they're going to be talking about a year and a half, they could just ask me, because I've been called a groomer for 2.5 years now. So, like, I'm the first, baby.
For sure. As someone who watches conservative media, not because I often enjoy it, but because my political circumstances mean the people I talk to listen to it, it does bubble up for years. And I when I read this now, like this article, when they're talking about New Jersey and people saying that, there's an over-sexualization of children, and then I see the talking points develop over time to our forum where I hear an over-sexualized curriculum will lead to over-sexualized kids. And I'm thinking, what consultant was paid some stupid amount of money to come up with that so they can bring it as a talking point. And also, indoctrination versus education, which that one's already tired out by now. So, it's obviously been a big deal. And the one, as I mentioned before, me and Kim actually had a brief conversation earlier, and again, this is in the notes. In the Daily Herald, the organization that I'm a part of, the Schaumburg Township Republican Organizations, had a forum recently for 6 of the 11 candidates for the April school board election, including yourself, and I think you did a pretty good job.
Oh, well, thank you.
Let me ask your opinion on the topic. The forum itself, like the format, did you think it was okay? You think it had been better managed? Personally, I don't like the whole one question at a time because I feel like it's just devolving and people are like, my question's for Kim. Why are you like this? And then it's like, my question's for Stephen. Why are you like this?
Right.
And then for the other candidate, it's like, why should children not be sexualized?
Right.
I often don't feel like it's very productive. But I mean, there are other board meetings and other forums. What was your general sense of it?
So in comparison to the forum that I went to in 2019, so the Republicans had a forum, as is tradition.
Also there.
Right. And, I'm going to say, I would like to think, although this is just conjecture on my part, so it's not like I've spoken to anybody about this, I would like to think that the reason for the change in rules and format between my 2 forums that I've now experienced is because I'm assuming the forum was really hoping that all 11 candidates would attend, and that's just a big group of people to manage, right, for a forum, and try and figure out how are we going to get productive answers out of 11 people in this allotted time with an audience that feels really passionate about the issue.
Oh, 100%.
So trying to figure out rules that are going to work for an event like that is a difficult logistical project. So I will admit that. And that's what I'd like to chalk up, like the change in rules, because I found them to be unproductive. So the forum that I went to in 2019, I thought was very well done, very well thought out, very well planned. And it certainly, I believe, gave all of the people who attended an accurate representation of the candidates who are running in the race, whether agree or disagree. Because each person got a chance to answer the questions posed, et cetera. And there was a moderator that kept the heckling down to a minimum.
For sure.
And those 2 things weren't the case this time around. And so, it did leave, there was a disparity in the way questions were asked. And, at the same time, it's not my forum. They're not my rules. People can organize events the way they want to. And I was, at the end of the day, still very happy to participate and glad that they put the event on in the first place.
For sure. And I mean, I'm the only person who video recorded it. So you'd think that for having like a candidacy for school board, there would be, I know the Daily Herald was there. They sent the one guy there. I figured they would do a better job of not just calling me at the last minute to video it, but whatever. What I wanted to bring up was during the actual event was, again, link to it is in the description. There is a moment where Kim is trying to talk and then the audience is yelling over her and I'm in the background and I've had enough and I just yell, "It's a candidate forum, let the candidates talk." And a lot of people stared at me like, and some of them were like, because I mean, there's a lot of rabble-rousers in the crowd. They want to be yelled, but I want to hear what you guys are trying to say because, you're incumbents, there's challengers. It's been a really challenging 4 years.
Yeah.
And education has now become, I think, the most dominant political issue.
Yeah.
Since COVID forced us into lockdowns and parents were now seeing what kids were learning. Some of it not great, some of it I think maybe is misconstrued for political purposes, but it's gotten really big, and that goes into the next thing. When I read your race, that this particular race is so important, it was featured in the Sun-Times from Rich Miller on Capital Facts.
Oh.
It's in this article in the Sun-Times, Illinois Republicans, Democrats focusing on building from the bottom up, which means that when they're thinking about candidates going from the local elections to who's going to be your next state rep, state senator, your president. I'm not going to press you on that, don't worry. But just the parties are being involved in these non-partisan races because there's an ideological bent to it.
Yeah.
And in this case, the quote here from Rich Miller is, "Local Republican Party organizations are jumping into races, including McLean County, which has been a hotbed of radicalization. Don't even get me started. I worked in the Republican primary last year. That place was crazy." But Palatine's high school district is also attracting local GOP assistance, which some residents are up in arms about the local school board adopting sex education standards.
Together, we can gain a majority on the board and put a stop to the sexualization of children in our schools. One recent door hanger. So your race is it's getting quite a lot of attention. Do you feel like when it comes to school board races, and I've read a lot of, especially since COVID, a lot of people have been burnt out because there's just constant attacks from people. Yeah. Constant, at the meetings, they're being berated, they're being emailed, they're being harassed on social media. The FBI's had to be involved in some cases. Yeah. How do you handle all that? Because as a public official, it's, I shouldn't say it's par for the course, but it is. But in the social media age, it's just like more par for the course in your face all the time. How have you dealt with it?
That's a really good question. So I will say that what you're just describing is only part of one reason that I've made the change, that I made my life, my digital life, so when I say my online life, much smaller. This is part of the reason. First of all, it's just a question of where do I put my time, right? And being on the school board and doing a good job requires time. You have to put your time into it, right. And so that time has to come from somewhere. And I needed to make my life smaller. To be honest with you, I had to shut down a lot of communication channels. So I was really appreciative when Facebook finally opted for the option to just turn off messaging altogether, rather than, I had been managing. And, I don't want to imply that, I'm under siege by a whole heap of people. We're talking about a small group of very persistent people, right? It's usually the same people. So we find a way to block them on one, they come at you another way. And I'm decently, I'm only 41. I know how to use my phone and the internet, right. So I did. I just made my life a lot smaller. And that was also due to COVID. Like, it's not just stressful as a school board member having to make these decisions that are difficult. It's also living in the same pandemic that everybody else is living in and trying to negotiate it. While all that was going on, my grandfather was slowly dying. My grandfather was somebody, he was my dad more than my father.
Wow. Very,
very close to him. And that's an awful experience to watch someone that you love just slowly and painfully waste away. And, I remember looking at my grandfather and looking at my emails and blocking the same people on Instagram or whatever, and finally realizing that, I'm 40, I'm statistically in the back half of my life now, and how much of that life do I want to spend looking at Twitter?
Right.
It's like none, actually. I don't delete my account. And so, my life got a lot smaller, and it was in part because of the harassment from this group of people. I will say that it's gotten worse in the last 2 years. I've had to file police reports to the point where I've been wondering if I have to move my children temporarily to my mother's house in a different community, because they're not feeling super safe in the house because of the issue I had to call the police about. And at this point, I have a police officer escort me back to my car after meetings. I carry pepper spray. Now I carry my Louisville Slugger. Wow. So, it's, and you wouldn't have, I shouldn't have to do that, but I do have to do that, unfortunately. That's just the state of things. Which brings me back to the whole point, is that people should be able to disagree. And, at the end of the day, we're talking about our schools and our children. There's nothing more important. So I certainly understand the level of passion. I have an issue with the guardrails. If your disagreement is such that it requires the person you're disagreeing with to call the police, then I think you really need to take a close look at your behavior.
100%, and I agree. And I'm so sorry that's happened. I mean, no person should have to face that, nonetheless an elected school board member who's just doing, the best judgment you can do, and the voters elected you for this job, so you have every right to be out in public and do the things you want to do without harassment. And I know for listeners, me and Kim both know who these people are because we've dealt with them. If you know who they are, don't blow them up in the comments or anything like that. It's just these people can be passionate, and some of them can get a little much. And I'll tell you a quick story on my end of harassment. I worked on the Richard Irving campaign last year. I was the volunteer coordinator. And I had a Google number, put it out there, said, hey, if you want to volunteer for the campaign, go ahead and do it. One woman, who I will name because I don't like her and I'm not afraid to name names, Carol Davis, who unfortunately now is for some reason the state GOP's election integrity director.
Oh, really?
Which you want to talk about made-up job titles.
Oh.
Right? She called me and left me a harassing voicemail calling me disgusting and saying, never call me back again. Then shared my name and the number on her Facebook page telling people to harass me, which was then shared by Stephanie Trussell, running mate to Darren Bailey, to her multi-thousand page people. So, of course, I also got a deluge of texts saying, you're a rhino, why are you working for an Uncle Tom, and, of course, kill yourself. Which it's unfortunate it gets there, but literally people will just say kill yourself. And not that that's a great transition, but what we do online now, I really feel like has changed. And I mean, you say you're 41, I'm 33, going to be 34. I feel like when we were younger, there was this promise of the internet as being a place where you really could, open up and see things. And I think, especially for like the LGBTQ, I don't want to miss it, QIA, if I'm correct, community, right? This gave them places they would never be before when mainstream media shut them out. And like from like 2000, I want to say 4 to like 9 or 10, when younger people were on these places, they may have been specifically younger people, college students, safer people who were in that kind of attitude. It was great, right? People were expressing. They could come out as gay online and get thousands of yes, we're with you, and not be thrown out by their family or local community or something. But I think the problem is that then everybody else got on the internet, and then when everybody else got there, every grandma and aunts on Facebook shared a post from somebody who they thought was telling the truth, and the next thing you know, you're getting harassed and I'm getting harassed because they believe that we're grooming children, despite it not being anywhere. When you said that you cut down on your internet life, I thought that was brilliant because I almost wish I could, but because I want to say it is addiction. And in the articles that we've shared with each other, which again I think is in the description, there is a problem with kids and especially like the pandemic, the digital age, mental health, and frankly, parents and adults in some cases are not helping. What, for you on the school board, seeing how kids have been in the schools have been dealing with technology, what has 211 done to help with the mental health crisis? Because as I've realized, especially as you mentioned with the article you sent me, girls, I thought young men were having issues, which they are. Young women are facing some serious issues in this new digital age.
Yeah. So we have used some of the COVID, I'm just going to call it COVID money.
Yeah.
There's ESSER, not to bog people down.
Right, too many details.
Right.
Yeah,
so COVID money from the government,
yes.
right? So we used some of those funds to get extra student support staff, counselors, etc., to lower our ratios to make sure kids could get the support they need a lot faster than they had previously done. And we've done that. My biggest priority in running for re-election, one of the main reasons that I decided to throw my hat back in the ring was that I want to be really frank here. We're a financially healthy district. We're a rich district. We have money. We should be able to keep those staff once the government money runs out.
Right.
That's important to me. Now, of course, it's very easy to say, we need more support staff. We need more teachers. Finding those teachers, finding those support staff for anybody who's been even surface level paying attention to the news, getting harder and harder to do. So you have to hold on to the ones that you have, right? Because they could go anywhere. So just putting more people in our buildings has been a big push, and one I'm proud of and one I want to continue going with. That's also to say we've put in a survey, which is operates kind of like a mental health survey,
right?
Which allows now and parents, again, always remembering parents can opt their children out if they don't want them to participate, but for all of the students who do, it takes a temperature on your mental health, and because unless you ask the question, you don't know what the answer is anyway, right?
Right.
We also formed a wellness committee, which was part of why I first campaigned in 2019. I wanted to create a wellness committee. I'm glad that we finally had consensus to do that, 2 years later. And that exists, that brings students, staff, and then board member liaisons. And board member liaisons are really just supposed to be in those committees to listen and then report back to the board in open session as a whole.
Right.
They're not meant to be driving the bus. So, in the wellness committee, it's bringing students from all of our schools together. They have their school-based clubs. Then they send various members of those clubs to the whole with various administrative, building and head admin level staff members to get together and talk about the wellness stuff. And most of this is, when we talk about wellness, we're talking about student mental health.
Right.
The initiatives that they've tried at the school, the things that have been well received, the things that didn't work so well, to try and figure out what actually helps, what should we be doing, does this survey that we want to give to you seem like it would be relevant, and asking those questions for student feedback before just, using it as a headline to say, look what we're doing about mental health.
Right.
To make sure that things we're doing that we're working. So we've got a lot going on, but I think we need to continue to do the things that we have, and I think we need to do a hell of a lot more. I mean, as you saw from the articles, we're at a crisis point. And I don't think anybody who's watched a board meeting anywhere really in the country, is my sense of things, can sit and say that we're all collectively in a great place.
Right. Like I said, even in the before times when things were good, there were problems, as Pericles stressed, and COVID, which pushed everybody to doom scroll and be socially isolated for all sorts of different reasons.
The comedian Ronnie Chang?
Yeah.
I love Ronnie Chang, and he does a great bit in one of his specials. I can't remember which one it is, but he does a great bit, like 50 years into the future, talking about the internet. And it'll be kind of like, do you remember when we let pregnant people smoke? It'll be the same kind of, do you remember when we just let you have the internet and you could just Google anything you wanted? We'll be talking about it like that in the future.
100%. I even think about it now. And I mean, in 2009, my nephew was just born, and we just didn't even think about it. I was like, hey, let's watch SpongeBob on my computer, and I didn't even think putting a screen in front of a small child, what does that do?
Right.
And I don't think anybody thought of that until, if smartphones became everybody's predominant cell phone, roughly 2014, 2015, so that means pretty much every kid who's grown up through COVID has lived in a smartphone, always connected era. And then when you're, and I think back to when we would have been younger and we were just learning about the internet, and they're think about it, you might be able to just learn from home and not have to go to school one day. Wouldn't that be cool? And then COVID forced us all in that digital future that we were promised, and it was not as good as advertised, right? If I could never do a Zoom meeting again in my entire life, I would be happy.
Can I actually jump in here about something you might find interesting?
Go for it.
So my husband is Australian, lived there for a number of years, and we moved back from Australia in 2008, right? So about 6 months after the economy collapsed.
Right.
Great timing.
Perfect.
So the first job that I got being back was administering a grant that was supposed to encourage GED recovery for recently paroled young people on the South Side, primarily from Little Village. Right? So the state had put money behind it, and they were, not shockingly, having trouble finding someone who would actually teach the program to the small group of people. So, and I was happy to do that program. It was a great experience in working with these kids who were out on parole and from a very different sort of life than I'd ever led, right? One of the things it made very clear to me is that, and I'm not going to make assumptions about whatever their home school, Chicago public schools were like. I don't know. But once they came to me, they'd been out of their schools for a while.
Right.
And the only resources available to these kids were online platforms, which I'll make it imagine beta test Khan Academy.
Right.
So Khan Academy, but much worse and much more basic.
Oh, yeah.
And so with these kids that had just fallen through the gap, they're like, well, just sit on your computer, which is already a problem.
Right.
And then do these classes, and at the end you get your GED. And so I knew going in, I'm like, oh no, this isn't going to go the way that you think it's going to go. That, no, No, it's not.
It's almost like the internet, and I initially think it's just made humans more human, and then there's the argument like maybe it just really actually made us worse. Because I think the idea of being, and a part of it is, I think, because part of the platforms, they went from being a very kind of open source friendly to be like, what gets the most engagement? And what gets the most engagement? All of the angry stuff. So the angry, you're a groomer, no, you're a groomer, no, you hate trans kids, no, you hate children. That gets all the clicks and likes. And while the adults are doing it for either entertainment or for monetary gain, I think kids are seeing this and they're thinking like, why are adults talking about me like I'm not here, or like I have no agency in this matter at all? And I get, when I see the intensity from some of these parents, like I'm obviously not a parent. I have cats, closest thing I can get to, but with my niece and nephew, and I see, parents, that kind of love and passion is something that's unbridled. But when you get that intensity mixed with either misinformation or political actors trying to sell you something, it gets this very dangerous cocktail where, school board members have to get a police escort to their car because these people literally believe that you want to, encourage children to get surgery at 12 to change their gender, right? And it's scary because, my sister-in-law works for Laura Children's Hospital, and they have been subject to a deluge of, false information coming from these conservative news sources, AM 560. I'm not going to name people, so I know you got to be appropriate and nice, but I lack that necessary need. Which, fun quick aside, I was almost appointed to the District 54 school board by Stroh, but I did not have kids, so I was a very close second. So, which, I mean, whatever. I get it. You got kids, you got a slightly more vested interest in me, but that's just a quick aside. Point being is that I definitely feel like in terms of how people have responded, at least since 2015, 16, it's definitely gotten worse. And I think it's because people, they're incentivized to do it because they get clicks and likes. And then you're in these little Facebook groups, your little moms for liberty, dads for parental freedom, citizens for kids' education or whatever, right?
Yeah, and those exist of all political stripes.
Of course. But then, you get in the little echo chambers and they talk about people, but it's like, I think maybe we've learned in the digital age to separate those two things, but I think a lot of people haven't. Like a lot of older people are like, Barb shared on Facebook, therefore it's true, therefore kids are being attacked. As an educator, I know that you've talked to both kids and adults about, misconceptions about sex and things like this. Since you've been on the board, I know, have you had talked to any other people who were more challenged at first, but since then you've been able to talk to them and they're like, oh, I guess I was wrong, or oh, I guess I was misinformed?
Sure. So I'm a fan of canvassing. I think it's important. And so I canvassed, in 2019 when I was running, and I was subject to the light version of what I'm being subject to now. Like none of it's changed. It's all the same stuff. And so I had a lot of those conversations, at the door, because I didn't buy any data on purpose, which is another thing that your listeners might be interested in, because I have canvassed before for candidates where data was available, and talking about social media, the amount that data brokers have on us as individuals is really incredible. I mean, I was canvassing for candidates over 4 years ago, and the data I was offered, I like to ask questions about where this stuff comes from. And that data, like the data broker who provided that, they know what television shows you watch, and so it's wild what people know. And I didn't want to buy any data. I don't believe in it. So I just walked random doors to speak to people. So, some of those people didn't know that there was an election at all. They hadn't heard of the school board. And then other people had been under the impression that, I'm a pedophile apologist of some kind. And it's like, actually, it's nice to meet you. I'm largely at home knitting sweaters.
I am not, in fact, a monster. I am actually a mom.
In fact, a big part of my life and my job is preventing violence to young children, since I was subject to it as a child myself. So, yes, I've had those conversations. But, you have to point out that those conversations take time, right? And so I understand the more cynical approach of like, let's only speak to people who we think can vote and we think are already friendly
right.
and not waste time. I don't think it's right. I think when we're talking about larger problems within, like, if we're looking at the results we get in terms of like the candidates who run for larger offices,
right.
especially congressional offices and stuff, like, you get what you pay for, and like the system that we've built produces the results that we're stuck with, you know.
True.
So, and it's a complicated issue.
True.
But yes, I've had those conversations, and I think and this is all part of my MO. I think it's important to be honest. I'm not interested in pandering to an audience to get votes or any sort of approval.
Right.
I'm just not interested.
That's good, and I mean, I've noticed that as well, because you can tell certain candidates or board members, in any field anywhere, there are people who talk real, right? They have real conversations, and there are people who repeat things they think that people want to hear. Like when you have the conversation with the board saying, yes, I voted for those standards and I'll do it again, here's why, right? It's a double down, but in a way that is both informative and understanding of the position that's there. As opposed to, I feel like some of the other candidates at that board literally were given like 4 things to say and just kept repeating those same things over and over again. And the assumption was that the audience would just beat up on you, and they would say the thing, and they would clap, and then they'd clip it and share it and say, hey, look at me, I own the lib. And it's just like that for the 10 millionth, billionth time. It's just so played out.
I mean, I remember this is like when I quit Twitter, was the Discord, and the reason why I left that site in particular, and I refuse to engage much on Facebook at all anymore, but especially Twitter, within 10 minutes of opening the app, I realized I had nothing for that 10 minutes. I had nothing to show for myself.
Right.
Except for a general feeling of despair, honestly. And it was that fast. And I was like, this isn't good for my brain. It's not good for me. I have to stop. Like, I can't be here anymore. And, you know, in talking about like a lot of these things that you, like in the articles that we've traded back and forth, I mean, when I think about me as a teenager, you know, everybody has a hard time in high school, whether it seems like it or not. Like they do. Like that's,
I did.
Yeah.
Sure.
You have a hard time in high school. I had a hard time in high school. Like, it sucks.
Right.
And I'm going to be really honest that there were a lot of nights, especially I've made it no surprise. Like, I grew up in a house where I was not safe. Like, I had a stepfather I was dealing with, a lot of violence in my house. And there were a lot of nights that I spent praying to a God that I believed in at that time, you know, to just let me not wake up in the morning. Like, that was my general feeling. And then if you had taken Instagram and Snapchat and social media as a rule and just the connectivity and put it in that mix, I'm not sure if I would have made it, to be honest with you.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I think that's the scary part now, is that, you know, those feelings of sadness and despair that all kids go through when they're facing growing up, high school, all this stuff has always been there, right? But then it's like, hey, what if all of that was public all the time? And while we're on those tangents, there's a documentary I watched a long time ago. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Living in Public. So it's from the 90s, right? One of those guys who made a fortune in the early tech billionaires basically was like, I'm going to build this place where people can live for free and they can eat for free and do all this stuff, but I get to film them all the time, right? 24/7, like, monitoring, right? And in the 90s, you're like, oh, I get to live and eat for free? That's cool. And of course, what happens is, like, 2 months in, everyone hates each other and the police raid the place. And the guy disconnects from technology, lives in Kenya now. But for me, it was like an eerie precursor, because, like, think about it, right? Back then, it was like, some guy's like, hey, I'll give you all this stuff for free, just let me have the data and video. And people willingly made that trade. And then instead of learning from that, it was just expanded and promoted and then consolidated to the point where, you know, Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp now, it's all the same company. And if they decide to either fix something or don't, it affects millions of people, right? Like, when they let this sort of stuff happen, I mean, I think Instagram in particular has been one of for girls' self-esteem, it's been the worst, because it's like, hey, I can craft something that will never look real at all. But then at the same time, those girls in there are like, why am I not like this, right? Why don't I look like a Kardashian? And it's like, they don't explain the makeup, the filters, the plastic surgery, the millions of dollars that went into it, the consultants. Kids are being sold a false image. And I know you were talking briefly earlier. With you and your kids, what do you do different with social media with them that you would have done when you were younger or when you previously had social media?
So my children are 10 and 12, and if my 12-year-old was here, he would love to talk to you about how crap I am at this, because we have different positions.
Of course.
And like I've said, I totally understand. He has every right to be pissed at me, and I'm not changing my mind. My husband's on board, of course, as well.
Of course.
And so my children we're very strict about screen time, always have been. So, in terms of it is very difficult, painful on multiple levels, psychologically, emotionally, physically, to try and go out to a restaurant with a 2.5-year-old child.
Oh.
It is an ordeal.
And it was like that
especially if there's a tablecloth.
Yeah.
And there's steaks. Where people, you feel like you have to be well behaved. It is terrible. It can be really terrible. And I know that putting an iPad or a phone in front of them would have made that easier, and we didn't do that.
Right.
And it's you're expected to behave, and we're going to go through the turmoil of what that process is.
You're right.
And when I'm saying this, I do ultimately respect other people's decisions, other parents' right to make whatever decisions they want.
Right.
So I'm really talking about what we decided to do with our children. We've been very strict from the beginning, and so our children still don't have phones. My oldest one is working through a contract that is to result in a phone in June, and it's a behavior contract. There's a deadline. If the stipulations of that contract are not met, that deadline continues to get further and further into the future.
Interesting.
He knows exactly what's going to happen, and he understands that once he gets that phone, he's going to be signing a modified version of that contract to keep it. It is very, very regulated, and Miles knows not to even bring it up until he's roughly the same age. That also being said is that they only get 60 minutes total of video games a week, split up into 2 30-minute sessions. That is entirely dependent on their behavior. And they're not allowed to engage in any online chat function of any video game they play on their iPad or online. And so they do have about 25 minutes of game time on their iPads once all homework is done weekly. But Mike and I regularly go through and just make sure that nobody can message them and they can't message anybody else.
That's smart.
Yeah, so we're very strict. And, part of the contract with my 12-year-old, because you can't, him at 18, he's not going to be doing the same rules. He needs a phone. You have to deal with reality.
Right.
But part of that is to go through several online resources that are dedicated to teaching kids how to be safe online, right? And one of the other things is that you can have reasonable, conversations about internet safety with your parents without losing your temper.
Right.
Right? And so, we're strict is essentially what it is. And then that's going to be the same with any social media applications that he wants to put on his phone. He's asked for Discord. The answer is no. He's 12. And the issue is acknowledging, yeah, sure, you can be pissed if all your other friends are different. I don't really care. You can be mad at us, but we're protecting your brain. And that's what we're doing.
It's hard to understand because it's if you let them go, it's what happens is that a bunch of people storm the Capitol on January 6th and assault police officers because you've let the worst impulses go through. And then I just think that's very awesome because, I feel like before it was just throw the iPad in front of your kid, they'll play a game. That was 2009, right? And in 2023, they're like, holy shit, why would you do that, right? We are very aware that there's a difference between, the early smartphone first tablets, they're kind of fun, and then they start ramping them up everywhere, and now everyone has one. And honestly, I can't even, this is inside baseball, but I'm literally recording this on an old cell phone while looking at my other cell phone, and Kim also has a smartphone. So, it's I almost wish it's we could remove technology, but it's so integrated and also so, it's just so nice to have everything right here at the same time. But at the same time, my wife is like, why are you on your phone? Yeah. And then I'll put it down, and then she puts it up, right. And no one's watching phones.
Yeah, and so, in talking about that period when I made my life smaller, so we do no phones at the dinner table. which is a fairly common rule.
Good call.
Nobody has their phones at the dinner table, they have to be somewhere else. And then when my husband and I sit down to spend time together, watch TV, whatever it is, I'm knitting, and neither of us have our phones. You can't be on your phone and watch the TV show together at the same time. And so that's one of the, things that I did. I realized, so I have a general feeling of despair that's pervasive on Twitter, or I could knit a sweater, and I'm like, I'd rather have a sweater at the end of the day. And so, my husband and I, at the end of talking about school board said, you have to set a good example too. And that's actually one of the things that I've been thinking about a couple meetings ago. I called for a review of our cell phone policy.
Right.
I think that's an opportunity for the district. Right now, we have some general overarching privacy policies, et cetera.
Right.
But schools differ between enforcement. I think it's an opportunity for the district to really think carefully about cell phone policy,
right.
And how our students have access to those or don't have access to them through the day.
So then real quick, so on my end, and obviously I graduated high school in 2008, so it's been a while, but the rule back then was no phone, in the locker, don't have it out at all. What is it like now?
So I can tell you no. So I want to preface this by saying I've spoken to some of the students that go to the wellness committees, because I wanted to ask what are the rules, right? And I speak to staff members from all of the schools, and then of course the conversations that are an open session with Dr. Small and her admin team at the board meeting 2 months ago. And so my general consensus is that at Schomburg, it's a general feeling of you don't pull your phone out during class, right? It's stricter there. That's not true at Friend, right? And then when I speak to friends of mine who teach in 214 as an example, it used to be to enforce that rule, the phone stays in the locker. If you pull it out in class, we're going to take it from you. Deans won't take that anymore. They won't take a kid who you're sending to them for pulling out their cell phone and just say no.
Right.
And they're not going to take anybody's phone. And the message is, if you confiscate a phone and it breaks, or you drop it,
right,
or a parent's pissed, it's your problem.
Right.
So, there's no admin level support in the whole thing. So the result of that is there's no rules anymore. And so I can tell you in a lot of schools, although I'm not specifically talking about District 211, I don't want to pretend that I have more inside knowledge than I currently do.
Right.
This is the whole point for the review. There's a lot of students who are just under the impression that they can Snapchat all day long. And there is a group of parents who believe they should be able to ring their children and have them pick up, no matter when that call comes through, even if it's in the middle of math.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, which is why I think it's an opportunity for District 211 to be really thoughtful and say, okay, let's look at our behaviors. Let's look at our policies. Let's look at how our staff feel about it. Let's get advice from our students. Let's check in with parents and see if we can come up with something that we think would be productive for everybody.
That's good. I think I'm amazed to hear this. It's funny, there's no rules anymore, but it's just so pervasive now, and it's what are you going to do? Confiscate every kid's cell phone, and or they have a second cell phone, right? Or again, if the parents are I need this because I need to be in contact with my kid, and again, if they have medical issues or things that they really need to be in contact with them for, I'm not going to pretend I know all that stuff, but...
The other motivating factor for that, though, is that I want to be able to call my kid if there's a shooter.
Which is the world we live in now, which is messed up. And that's a subject we didn't even get into. But I still remember taking school shooting drills, later on in my life, and then doing the bomb threats. And now it's just way more apparent than it was when I was a kid. And that's just, our time is running short, so we can get into that one. The last thing I wanted to get to was, and we discussed this before I got here, is that I received an email from, I won't name them, but a certain political action committee that is making certain claims about 211. There is a whole bullet point, I'm sure it'll be up there, about Kim, which we've already discussed lots about. But I wanted to get to the, not about you specifically, but about the claims that are made here.
Sure.
It says that less than 50% of students in 211 are meeting standards in math and English per the Illinois State Report Card. When I looked at that up, I don't think that's true.
It is not true.
Okay. Do you know what the... Do you recall what the state report card says about 211?
Well, I know our ratings off the top of my head, but the detail level knowledge I don't have stored away in my long-term memory. But we have excellent schools and then one commendable, I believe. Yeah.
Excellent. And then one claim here is that obviously D211 board voted 5-2 in November to opt in to obscene new comprehensive sex ed standards over massive parental opposition, question mark? I don't know why there's a question. Fewer than 3% of Illinois districts have opted in. Do you know if that's true about the Illinois districts opting in?
I don't believe that that's true. No. And I think it's important for people who are trying to understand this issue that in large part because of the misinformation that's been spread, not just in our community, but statewide. A lot of districts outsource their sex education standards. So if they do that, they can claim that they've opted out. But if the organization that they contract with to teach sex education is teaching sex education, it has to be up to the new state standards. That's the way the law functions.
Right.
So they can claim that they've opted out, but the organization they might be using are teaching up to the state standards, if that makes sense.
Yes, no, 100%.
So, no. But at the same time, I don't spend a lot of time debating the veracity of these people's claims generally, so I'm not the expert on how much is true.
100%. And the last thing is, the one point on here is that the current Do11 board, including you and another board member who seek re-election, increased wasteful spending 4 years in a row, an increase of 8.7% during their last term alone. I'm just going to assume that's not true, but has school spending, obviously this is a school, a district that has resources, and I think spends them in a way that seems appropriate and fiscally responsible. Has spending gone up at all? Or is that, again, is it COVID money versus district money? What's the deal?
Yeah, so we've certainly got a couple of sources of revenue that have been irregular, right? So we had a land sale. District 211 had a plot of land that they were going to build a school on. And my understanding is that land purchase vastly predates the board. It was ages ago.
Right.
Been sitting on it, finally able to sell it. That was about $17 million in profit, right? And so that was put into our education and savings account to sit there and say, well, we have to decide what to do with this money.
Right.
And that was part of the strategic planning process as well, trying to figure out what the community wanted.
Right.
So that's a one-time source of revenue, right? And then we also had COVID money, and there's a lot of restrictions about what you can use that for. So that's just not free money that you can do whatever you want with. It's earmarked already.
Right.
It comes to you earmarked. But that's out of irregular revenue, and it's reported as such. Now, I think that my guess is that they're likely talking about tax increases, levy increases.
Right.
And what they probably did was they went through each of the years that I've had a vote on the levy and added up whatever percentage increase was prepared and then added them together. And that's the number.
Right.
And I know that we're short on time, so I'm not going to wax prophetic about this. Yes, I have voted to add the new property to our levy each year. If you do not do that, you never get that back. So if you just don't tax the new property growth in your community, you give it up not just that year, not the year after, you give it up forever, right? And so that's not a condition that private businesses have to operate with.
Right.
And it's a stupid thing to do.
Right.
To just say, okay, well, I promise to give up $4 million this year and every year into the future.
Right, and I get, and I mean that's a whole other discussion about how schools are funded.
Yes,
the property tax
absolutely.
system in the state, the difference between like 211 and U46 among other school districts.
Sure.
From CPS to Carbondale.
It's
a whole thing, and of course you can learn lots about it. But our time is brief, so in the closing moments here, Kim, I just want to ask a question I think might be relevant. So you're here now. It's a month out from the election. Instead of me, imagine it's you. It's 2019. You've just been elected to the school board, and I don't know if you've seen those videos where it's explaining the pandemic to yourself or past self.
Oh no, I haven't.
They're very funny.
No.
There's like a whole series of them on YouTube where it's like it just gets worse.
I'm gonna check it out.
What if I'm you in 2019, fresh among all this stuff here? What are you gonna tell yourself to? I don't know if you want to be real, if you don't want to try to scare yourself. What are you going to tell yourself going forward when you're running for your second term?
Let's see. I would tell myself that it's not going to be what you expect. It will be very, very hard, but that difficulty will provide you with a lot of opportunities to grow in ways that you didn't expect. Both personal and professional. you will show up at meetings and you will do your job and you will consider running for re-election for the same ultimate reason that you show up to work at District 15 every day, and it's because those kids need you. Those kids need you, and that's why you do this, even when it's hard. And, as it has been my MO from the time I was born, which many, largely men, have tried to physically beat out of me over the years. It's not going to change who you are, and you can use this situation to become even more yourself and someone that you're proud of.
Wonderful, and that's a great note. And I just want to, one last thing. I know you said you have a limited media presence, but if anybody wants to reach out, where can they find you?
They can find me at KimberlyCavill.com. I have, the summaries of the issues that are really facing the school board, reasons why I'm running, a helpful fact for conspiracy theorists, which I know that you appreciate. That's probably the easiest one to reach out to me if you want to talk about school board related issues, is go to KimberlyCavill.com. There's a link to my email there.
Sure, and link will be in the description. So.
Yeah, anybody who actually lives in the district, you can reach out to me at my board member email that exists, at least until April 4th, and hopefully certainly for 4 more years after that. I'm here to serve you. That's the point. So you can reach out to me anytime.
Fantastic. And of course, as always, all links are in the description. I'd like to thank my guest, Kim Cavill, for being here today and discussing the life of a school board member, the elections, and of course, just a general fun wide range of topics. I appreciate all my listeners out there, and I thank you for listening to the season opener of Season 4 of the NotoriousSA podcast. Thanks so much, Kim. I appreciate it. All right.
Thank you. You're a great interviewer.
Oh,